Hey everyone, welcome to Two Comic Book Dudes. I'm Aaron Clutter, editor-in-chief of Comic Booked.
Hey everybody, Justin, managing editor of Comic Book.
And this week we've got a special guest joining us, Jason Faris, the creator of the Quantum Mechanic book series.
Hey, thanks for having me here. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk.
So tonight, Jason, we're going to talk about this is a five-book series, eventually.
Yes, yeah. The
Okay.
the fifth installation is in progress right now. I'm kind of in the home stretch with it.
Cool.
Nice.
Okay. So, we've had an advertisement up on our site for a while and a link for people that want to check out some more about the series. Looks like some great books. I personally haven't gotten a chance to read them yet, but I do want to. I've been through the Amazon information, and so really want to have you kind of talk about the series and let us know, if we pick up Stormfront, the first book in the series, what are we getting into?
Ah, well, it's an interesting thing because when I first put together Stormfront, or when I first envisioned the series, I had really been looking at some of the more creative things that some of the other authors out there had been doing as far as like how they offer their work, versus just the straight taking the idea of a novel and just making it digital. One of the things that had been happening around that time, it was John Scalzi was one that was doing it, was instead sort of compartmentalizing it, selling them off one chapter at a time. But I personally, some of his chapters were a little short for me. I felt like, 99 cents for 36 pages was a little asking a little much. So I made the decision that I would take essentially the first novel and I would break it into three pieces that would be sort of incrementally larger, so that the reader would have the opportunity to just sort of dip their toe in a little bit, and then gradually larger and larger bites as they went. So Stormfront is first in that, and it's obviously it's the smallest. We are working on going to print right now, and current estimates should be about 80 pages at about a 5x7, trade size publication. Um, in that book, that particular book, really, there's a lot of background there. It's primarily just to there is an instrument to allow the reader to sort of get nested into the world that we're talking about, which is not that far from now. We're talking about the early 2020s. We're also talking about the early 2030s, and then also from in the 2050s.
Okay.
One of the tools that I made use of is a little something I stole actually from Stephen King. Is this mechanism for being able to fill the user in, fill the reader in on details without having to use some of the more well-known tropes that you would see out there, like, oh, the new guy, so we have to explain to him how the warp drive works.
Right.
So that gets people familiar with, some of your principles. King, when he wrote Carrie, he used a really interesting mechanism, which was that every third or fourth chapter was actually a short article from a newspaper or magazine that had been written after the events of the book.
Yep.
So looking back in retrospect, so you'll find a lot of that in Stormfront. About two-thirds of it is written in that sort of style. It's mainly interviews being conducted by someone looking into and investigating these events that occurred in the 20s and 30s.
Very cool.
And documenting all of that, by talking to the people that were actually there.
Okay,
Wow.
I've seen that same kind of thing used in other sci-fi type stories where maybe like it's a captain's log recounting
Yes,
something, or like you
yes,
said, the interviews or the investigations. So that's really cool. And you do have a Kickstarter running right now, right? A
right
project
now.
for to fund the printing of the book. So
Yes,
that's really cool. We'll be sure to include a link to that Kickstarter in the
great,
description of this video and in our article that this video will nest in as well. So all
great.
right. So the basis of this world is basically nanotechnology has kind of gotten out of control, right? So now we have these hybrid creatures and all kinds of
Well,
stuff.
yeah, I mean, and that's a big part of it is that I guess I do realize that for some folks the whole idea of the singularity can seem like a little bit of like yesterday's news, something to talk about, but I do work in a very technical field in my day job. And I personally seen some things which have sort of made the hair on my arm stand up a little bit, as far as the things that are going on. And I do think that, when this sort of singularity happens, it's not really going to happen all at once, I don't think. I think it's going to be something that will happen in gradual stages. But I think that what we're really underestimating, not just here in the States, but worldwide, I think that is a global community. I think that we're really underestimating the potential for abuse that is there, inherent in these technologies. Things like artificial intelligence, things like nanotechnology, our increasing ability to manipulate the human genome, or the genome of other, animal and plant species. I'm probably about the farthest thing you would ever find from, being, I guess, like a tree hugger. But I am very, very aware of what I think are some very, very clear and present dangers that we're facing.
Sure.
So a big part of Stormfront is to, really confront the reader, very much just put it right in their face what these things could actually turn out to be, how this could go. One of the scenarios you're describing involves one of the main characters, a girl named Tammy. She's a nurse that has been in the Army for several years. She's seen her share of action, and one morning, she's assigned to a base in Mount Sinai, out in the Sinai Peninsula. So I believe this is right around 2023, and gets off her shift at night, decides to take a stroll up onto a nearby rock formation where she likes to just kind of sit and have a cup of tea in the morning and kind of wind down before she goes to sleep. And as she's up there, suddenly, right up out of the sand boils, about 40 of these biomechanized, hybrids that have never been seen before. And they launch a full-scale attack on her base. And she's injured, unfortunately, and before she can even get off the rock formation. She's injured and then forced to lay there, unable to move, and watch as this happens. And it is very confronting. I did consult with a lot of veterans that have had some very intense combat experiences themselves, and worked with them closely to make sure that what I was describing was as accurate as possible and conveyed, not only the facts of what was going on, but what was the experience like for them. So that was a big part of it. So it's a big piece of it is, what are we going to do when this sort of thing starts to happen? And, where will it lead after that? Even after we've realized that this is happening, how are we ever going to put the lid back on that jar?
Yeah, that probably won't happen.
Right.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Well, and you got me thinking with as accepting as our society is of certain things. Like I work in healthcare for my day job, and we're all mandated to take a flu shot every year.
Right.
Who's to say that down the line that doesn't become more than a flu shot?
Right.
Children are vaccinated for how many things that parents go, oh, okay, it has a bunch of letters in it. I guess go ahead and let my kid take some shots, right? Oh, this will reprogram them. This will make them a docile member of society. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, the potential for abuse there is it's so high. It's staggering. And I guess what's really the most frightening thing is how far down the barrier to entry is getting for the ability to do these things. Quite literally, 20, 30 years ago, the idea of how to work with DNA and how to program DNA was something, that only the most elite of elite were capable of doing, after, decades of experience and knowledge of some extremely intricate mathematics. And now there are literally applications that will allow high school age children to just sit down and write code that becomes DNA. Wow. It can be, written out. I've personally worked with a young man who, as part of his PhD thesis, he created his own flies and completely rearranged their DNA to create the kind of fly that he wanted. And he had virtually unlimited control over the form and structure of this, if he wanted 4 arms, 6 arms, 8 arms, he could make it whatever he wanted to be. And it was relatively simple for him to do. So I think that this is, that to me really honestly is the larger threat. It's not so much that these technologies exist and what they're capable of doing. It's that we're approaching the point where they're becoming garage hobby things.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So we could get to the point where we have the dream turkey for Thanksgiving with 8 legs, right? So I have 5
the Futurama
kids,
turkey,
Right. Well, I have 5 kids, and every one of them wants the legs. So,
Yep.
having 6 would be great. So, yeah. All right. Well, that's cool. That's Stormfront, and then you currently have Prometheus Within and the Third Law, and then Rise of the Embodied is available as well. It's part 4. And the Return of Heroes is part 5 that's coming out in January, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
All right. So what, I guess, how you can kind of go however far you want to in the story. Have you basically told as much as you want to tell, get people's...
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, believe me, there's a lot I can tell without, really spoiling things. So basically, the central core theme of the story is... the environment that I just described, this world that I just described, where these things have just, these threats have finally materialized and we're faced with this. And then in the midst of this, someone appears, a man appears that, there's a horrible series of bombings in the States. And, I live in Northern Kentucky and one of the bridges here that's always been a big problem is what they call the Brent Spence. It's a very narrow bridge. It's old. And I-75, which is the, one of the main arteries for the entire country, goes across it. And I did a lot of research on it. I took a good hard look at it and realized that, if that bridge ever went down, that there was no way that the Army Corps of Engineers could put in a temporary bridge. It's not possible with the location where it is and how it works. Yeah. Just couldn't be done. So it would be disastrous, and if they also severed several other bridges, that would happen as well. So that's one of the events that occurs, and it's in the midst of that. There's another character is introduced, the youngest one, whose face is on Prometheus Within, and that's Jessica. She's 11 years old, and she happens to be in the car with her parents going across that bridge when it's blown. When terrorists destroy the bridge. And she loses her legs, and she loses one arm, but manages to crawl free of the wreckage. And as she does, she, it looks up and she can see people on the shore. And then she sees someone running towards the shore and is running faster than it's possible to run. And she just can't, she thinks she's hallucinating until he leaps from the shore to the remainder of the bridge that she's on. Picks her up, and they disappear.
Cool.
And no one knows where. And then they reappear outside of a local hospital. He brings her in, turns around, and runs before anybody can grab him. No one can understand how it is that he's done this. They check everything. One of the things they come to realize is that he didn't teleport, which was the original assumption. It turns out that he actually performed a tesseract. So he folded space-time.
Yeah. Cool.
In order to transport her to where she needed to be, purely as an act of will.
Wow.
So here we are in this future where essentially, science has become God. And all of a sudden comes along a person who can do things that science can't explain. There's no way that he should be able to do this. Now that character turns out to actually be Jacob. He's on the omnibus, which is not in the advertisement. If you want to get the first 3 books together, it's in the first omnibus there, and his face is on the cover of that. And as it turns out, he was a child prodigy in mathematics, and also, contrarily, in biblical interpretation, he's a very, very spiritual person. And by the age of 7, he's won many major mathematics awards. By 11, he's known around the world. And at 17, he believes that he has found the secret to the unified theory. And he believes that it's in the Bible and that there are pieces missing, and he has to go find them in the Mideast. Goes to the Mideast in search of this. But a short distance into it, his brother goes with him. And a short distance into it, they disappear. and no one can find them, and they don't find them for 2 years. When they reappear, they just reappear out of nowhere, and Jacob comes stumbling into a village with his brother on his back. No one has any idea how they got there, and the brother's okay, but Jacob goes into a coma for a long time, and when he wakes up, he has these abilities. But he doesn't tell anyone. He keeps this to himself, and it's on that day when the bridges are destroyed that he then decides to go ahead and reveal himself. But he's a very, very scarred individual at this point. He is not who he was. So he's been living his life very quietly. He took over his father's garage, hence why he's a quantum mechanic.
Makes sense. That's cool.
So,
Okay.
yeah. And Jessica turns out to not be who people think she is either. As it turns out, the original character that I mentioned, Tammy and Jacob and Jessica are all connected to each other in ways that they just don't know yet. And as time goes on, they find those connections. And the big part of it is discovering that the so-called terrorists that destroyed the bridges are actually this group called the Embodied that have used singularity technology essentially to transcend the human state. So they have moved on to become pure, essentially living technology. And they were the ones that destroyed. They're working in a clandestine form for another, world power. And so they destroyed the bridges in order to, create certain political events. And the technology that they use to be what they are is very deeply nested in artificial intelligence and nanotechnology. And then one of the things that happens is that Jessica later on manages to get her hands on the same technology.
Wow. Okay.
So, there's a lot of changes and twists in there. And, Rise of the Embodied is a lot about, the Embodied coming back, making more changes, moving beyond even the state that they were in. And now with Return of Heroes, what we're really up against is, sort of this almost Armageddon-like crisis that is beginning to fulminate as a result of what's going on. Because, the use of these technologies has been unregulated for so long, and such a black market has erupted that we're starting to see what people that are in that realm of study would call wildfire events.
Oh, wow.
Sudden nanotechnology explosions. Campobasso, Italy is wiped out. Hundreds of thousands of people are killed by an out-of-control nanotech swarm. Things of that nature. So at this point, at that point, Jacob and the others who have been involved in all of this from the beginning, have to make a decision. Are they going to, continue to sit back and let this happen? Or is it time for them to step forward and actually do something about this, because they're the only ones who have the ability to do it?
Cool. Well, it's interesting, a lot of movies over the last year or so, Ex Machina, and I know there was the...
Beautiful movie.
Yeah, and The Machine was kind of just right before that. AI from a few years back, the Kubrick Spielberg movie. I mean, all those speak to this type of thing with differing scenarios, each one.
Yes.
But yeah, there's always a light and a dark side to any technology, and this is no exception. So, sounds very, very cool. Well, the one thing that Justin, were you going to say something?
Oh no, I was just wondering. Like you said that initially you had the novel, and then you had to break it up into 3 parts. So that's kind of where you started when you went the online method. But as far as the original novel form of it, how long had you actually worked on it to get it to that point before breaking it up? Like, how long has this been going on?
Wow. I started working on the series in 2013, thereabouts. I write fast, not really sure why. It's both a structured and organic process for me. So, I do have an outline. I do plan ahead and have, storyboards and stuff that I've sketched out. But, at the same time, I try to let it be organic. There have been a lot of times when my characters have surprised me and done things that I did not expect. which is as an author, I've heard other authors describe that happening, and I've just thought, how crazy is that? This is an imaginary person in your head, and you're saying they do something you didn't expect. How does that work? But the flip side of it being writer's block is essentially when imaginary people in your head decide they don't want to talk to you. So, um, so yeah, I mean, I've been working on it since about then. I think I was about a third of the way into the third law when I made the decision to break it apart and start sectioning it out. And it was pretty well received at first. I was happy with that, but in retrospect, I think if I had to do it again, I probably would have waited and kept it in the single novel format. Mainly because I found that science fiction fans are actually, they like a larger story. They like an epic. Yeah. They want something big they can sink their teeth in. They're typically very well read. They typically read very fast, have good comprehension. Yeah. They tend to have very technical and facile minds. So, they don't really want these brownie-sized bites. Right. So that was why. That's why Return or Rise of the Embodied is that's a 360-page book. I think Return of Heroes will probably be closer to 500 pages.
Wow. See, I don't have a problem reading that if I have it physically in my hand. Yeah. I have a hard time reading it electronically. Like I would much rather have the smaller bites electronically. That's why I do well with comics electronically. But I don't do real well with books electronically. So even with an iPad and the Kindle app and all that stuff, I just can't do the flip stuff. So
yeah, well, comics and books are a lot like beautiful women. They look great on screen, but there's nothing like having one in your hand.
That's true. Very true. Too funny. So this is a nice segue. Let's talk about comics. Do you have any experience with comics or?
I was a huge comic fan growing up. Right now, it's one of those things I would love to spend more time delving into and staying current with. There's a lot of really exciting work going on in the world of comics right now. I feel like the world of comics is alive right now in a way that it never has been, especially with its intersection now with games and with with the internet, with movies. It just feels really fluid and very dynamic. So it's something I would love to be more involved in. I would love to see the series turn into a series of graphic novels. I think it would be very. I've had people tell me multiple times they would work well. I've had a lot of people tell me. One guy told me that my books would make one hell of a Michael Bay movie. I'm not sure if it's a compliment or not.
Lots of explosions.
Yeah, lots of explosions, robots. But I mean, as a kid, I had a huge collection, and undoubtedly a lot of that, thinking, the idea of heroes, and is deeply nested. It's deeply rooted in the series. This idea of, how do heroes really develop? I think that the Peter Parker Spider-Man storyline, in my opinion, really does a much better job of extrapolating out for people, that experience, that journey that somebody has to go through to make that decision. You look at Superman, he doesn't really have much of a choice. Right. He is what he is, and there's not a whole lot of choice involved. Batman's driven by his own psychological issues, but Peter Parker could walk away at any point. He can do whatever he wants, but he makes this willing choice on a continuous, recurring basis to be a hero, to do the thing because he can, and that's I think that's something that's missing in our society right now. A big theme that I'm working on with Return of Heroes is where are they? Where have the heroes gone in our society? We just we used to see them all the time. One of my favorites is the guy that was walking home in China, in Beijing, and came across the tanks that were about to roll into Tiananmen Square, and stepped in front of the tanks holding bags of groceries to stop the tanks. People like that, and we're just not seeing that anymore. It's really, to me, that's more frightening than the threats to technology, and the lowering of the barriers to those technologies that we're seeing, because I think we're losing that as a society. We're losing that willingness for people to step forward and to do what's right, instead of doing what's in their own best interest. or just not caring. And it's really sad. It really saddens me to see that happening. And comics, I think, are, probably the purest form of expression for that particular feeling. The heroes that we create in comic books symbolize, I think, that feeling, that yearning inside of all of us to see those people who are willing to put in the sacrifice for the greater good of others, even when it has absolutely no benefit to themselves. It's a difficult thing, and I think we're losing it.
Yeah, well, and as much as I don't like to talk bad about the internet, since that's kind of our livelihood here at Comic Book, but I think that's a big contributor to that, because people, rather than physically get involved, they would rather go home, get in front of their computer, have that buffer, the anonymity of the screen that allows them to say whatever they want without fear of repercussion.
Right.
And unfortunately, we've developed this component of our society that feels like they're doing something by saying something.
Yes.
And it's just not the same.
No, there's been a big substitution of the symbolic gesture for actual action.
True. Yeah, putting a hashtag in front of something doesn't mean that you're actually helping.
No.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, I tweeted about it.
Yeah, right. Yep. And it's interesting, because there is, I read a lot of comics. Justin reads a lot of comics. We talk about a lot of comics during the week, and there's so many things that are happening now. I was involved in comics in the 90s and in the 2000s, and now in the 2010s, and it's just been so interesting to see the development of the shift. In the 90s, you had Marvel and you had DC, and then you had Image come up, and you had all these other little publishers that came up, and they bubbled up there for a little while, and then just sort of dissolved away. Right. Marvel and DC held their own because they had the distribution networks, they had the marketing, they had all that stuff behind them. Now, with the connection of comics and the internet, and you're seeing it too with your book, to be able to put this book out there online and reach people that you never would have reached if you were just self-publishing. Yep. Right. It's amazing how that connection allows for the involvement of an audience that was unreachable before.
Absolutely. I'm always shocked. I go into Amazon all the time and look at my, sales, and they've got some nice tools in there. And I'm always surprised at how many books I sell in places like Brazil and Japan, and just think, wow, how would that have ever happened? And on the subject of, sort of the rise and fall of what happened in the 90s, I agree. I think that, the distribution, capabilities that the larger, established comic book houses had a lot to do with that. But I also think that, during the 90s, there was a little bit of a cultural shift. And I think that the comics that we saw during that time were a reflection of it. A lot of the stuff that came out of Image, a lot of the more independent works were, in my opinion, there's a lot of really dark characters.
For sure.
A lot of dark work. And I think that, honestly, the reason why DC and Marvel, managed to survive that and come out on top was that they continued to push forward these iconic heroes who really sort of embody hope. We can only wallow in the darkness for so long, and people need help, need hope. They need to feel like there's, hope out there. And so I think that, the failure of those independent titles to truly produce unique characters that could inspire the kind of hope that you get from Superman, Captain America, Spider-Man, I think that contributed a lot to their decline. This constant embracement of darkness. It's fun. Everybody likes to wallow in it a little bit every now and then. But you can't live there. Sooner or later you got to get out. You just can't. You can't breathe. So I think that had something to do with it.
Okay, awesome. Justin, did you have any other questions? And we'll wrap up here. Okay, cool. Yeah. All right. Well, Jason, I appreciate you joining us. Jason Faris, the creator of the Quantum Mechanic book series. We'll have some more information as far as links to Amazon and to the Quantum Mechanic website so that you guys can check that out. We'll also have links, like I said, to your Kickstarter project, so they can help fund the printing of. And is it just for Stormfront initially, or is it
Stormfront at first? Yes.
okay? So we'll see how that goes, and hopefully
Yep.
that funds, and then you can move on with the other ones. So,
Yep. Yep.
all right. Well, if
And
you
it
guys have
will be
questions-
distributed through. It will be distributed through comic book stores instead of traditional bookstores.
Cool.
Oh,
okay,
awesome.
great. So if you're interested, definitely ask your comic shop to carry the Quantum Mechanics Stormfront when it gets funded. So definitely do that. If you guys have questions for Jason about this series, let us know in the comments, and we'll make sure he gets those. Please like, share, subscribe. We definitely want to get the word out about this great series and just get some more eyes on it.
Great.
Okay. Well, Jason, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, no, thank you.
We'll hopefully talk to you again.
All right. Talk to you soon. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.